Um, Before I move on, so we will be moving on to our third speaker for today, and that is none other than Mr. Rajeev Amarasuriya. And I would give an introduction about him. Mr. Rajeev Amarasuriya is a professionally an attorney at law since the year 2003 and currently has his own firm of legal consultation and is a Racina, I believe, AFGG fellow as well. He has held many positions under his professional sector, and he is the former secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, president of the Alumni Association of University of Colombo in 2015. He is a value addition for today's session since he has very unique perspectives on how important legal awareness is and professional ethics is. So his topic for today is consumer rights and protection. And over to you, Mr. Rajeev Amarasuriya.
Yeah, I will. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for inviting me for today's forum. I must congratulate the Institute of Architects for, I believe, the second year you're having this type of forum in succession, this discussion, not the exhibition, but the forum, and fourth year. And I think it's a value addition. It is a responsibility of professional associations to have education, provide information to membership and also to the public. So I must congratulate the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects for taking on this, and thank you for the invitation. When the organizers spoke to me and asked me whether I could speak, they also asked me to suggest a possible topic to speak to you today. And having thought about it a little bit, I thought consumer rights and consumer protection might be relevant and important for several reasons. One, of course, is that all of us, whether we are architects, lawyers, or lay citizens, we are all consumers. Also, specifically when it comes to this architect's profession, the engineering profession, you do deal with a lot of third-party suppliers, the suppliers of goods and services, and that is what you have showcased today at this exhibition. And it is important to know both from the point of view of the service provider, and also possibly the manufacturer and the seller, as well as a consumer, because architects not only provide services, but they support and advise their clients to obtain goods and services from other service providers. So that is why I thought of the topic of consumer protection and the rights and interests of consumers. So let me get on to the presentation straight away. Before looking at consumer protection and the consumer rights, one must first look at who are consumers. And that's a simple question and a simple answer. Basically, all of us at different points of time purchase goods and services. It may be your clients who obtain your services. It may be your clients who purchase various goods which we see around here. And also on a day-to-day basis, all of us are consumers. So that is very clear. So then one looks at what is consumer protection, and then one gets to look at what you need to protect the consumer from basically the goods and services provided, sold, whether there is any deception, whether goods and services which are harmful to health are sold, whether what was held out as being the description in respect of goods and services are adhered to, and whether there are unfair trade practices. So basically, that is what consumer protection is, what I'm intending to do is to take you through the brief concepts of consumer protection and then take you to the relevant aspects of the law. Then the next question arises, what are consumer rights? And that is where, where it becomes important. Consumer rights, of course, is a body of rights and privileges which have developed over time through practice, through disputes, and for eons. Over time, the relationship between the seller and the consumer has always been there, and those rights which have developed over time. If one looks at to understand what consumer rights are, one can look at international practice, and we find basically the international rights, the protection, the standards of consumer rights are set out basically across the world. And if one looks at the first right, right to safety, that is to be protected against the marketing of and sale of goods and services which are hazardous to life and property. And now that is very relevant in your industry. You have a lot of goods and services you purchase which are used in building, and if something is not up to standards, take for example your steel which is not up to standard, if it has some manufacturing defect, that could give rise to an effect on health and safety of the individual at some point of time. Similarly, you have right to be informed when you're purchasing goods, whatever it may be. I can see some various steel products over there. There is an obligation on the part of the seller to inform you as to the description, the details, the quality, the purpose for it, what it can be used, and to match it, of course, with what you want them to sell to you. Similarly, the right to choose. Now, that is an important right from a consumer rights perspective, because today, with the import restrictions, one finds that the options we have for purchase of goods and services is substantially limited. Now, if one looks at several items, there are monopolies which have been created not because of any other reason, but purely due to the lack of other imported alternatives. So now that is something which also is a right, which of course now we have to pass over this time, and hopefully that will also prevail. Similarly, the right to be heard. If you have a complaint in respect of some goods and services purchased, now that is something which happens all the time. You might purchase some good, or most likely a good which is of low value, say for 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, and then you might have a complaint. Now, you don't, the amount you spend is probably not worth your time and effort to spend months and years complaining about that product. And many of us, even if we are taken for a ride by a seller, we sometimes forget about it. We might complain once or twice. If it is ignored, we move on to the next stage. So basically, an integral part of consumer protection is also the right to be heard and the right to seek redress. Now I will come to that. We have a legal regime, but basically there must be a system where one could complain and one could seek redress and relief. And of course, consumer rights and education. When looking at the relevant law applicable to consumer protection and consumer rights, one must also look at the sale of goods ordinance we have, which sets in place the relationship between the buyer and the seller. Now, in the sale of goods, this is relevant to consumer rights and consumer protection for this reason. When you purchase a good, there are in law certain clauses or holding out which one considers as conditions, and there are others which one considers as warranties. Now, this is important for several reasons. Conditions can be considered as an important representation by the seller, which is essential to maintain the purpose of the contract. If it proves to be false, the buyer has the right to terminate the contract. So basically, take the example of the sale of a vehicle, automobile. Now you purchase a new automobile on the basis that you can ride in it, you can drive. It will take you from A to B. Now if you buy an automobile which in 3 months time doesn't run, or the engine collapses, or the engine doesn't work, now that is a basic condition of that sale which has been breached. And in terms of the law we have in Sri Lanka, you can repudiate that contract and ask for either your money back or for a replacement of the product. That is because it's a condition and there's a violation of a condition of sale. Parallelly, one has warranties which are not as serious as the condition, but nevertheless, various holding out given by the seller or the manufacturer that it will run in this way. For example, a warranty could be that your vehicle would have this amount of economy on fuel. With this 10 kilometers per liter or 15 kilometers per liter, they hold out. Then they might say, well, you will have this amount of travel without any repairs. Or you might say your various maybe your sound commands will have 200 possible commands you can make use of. So those are warranties of the sale. And in respect of warranties, if there is a breach, that would of course amount to a claim for damages. Just because your music setup doesn't perform as loudly or as with the quality as they held out to you, that doesn't mean you can go and ask for a replacement of the vehicle. That would mean that you can maybe complain, they can maybe look at repairing it, and alternatively they can look at you can claim certain damages. So that is how that works. The Sale of Goods also Goods Act also contains certain implied warranties. Now, briefly, the time is limited. I will briefly take you through this, but this applies to consumers. My example was a purchase of an automobile, but that would apply even to the purchase of a nut and or a bolt. The condition of title, the seller of the vehicle, of whatever product one sells you, must own that product to sell you. If it's on the basis of a description, if there is a description of the goods which are being supplied, there is an implied condition that it will match that description. So if they say this particular solar power unit will produce so much of electricity per hour, that is a description provided to you on the product, and that must be satisfied. If it doesn't, of course, you have cause as a consumer. Condition as to a sample. If you are provided with a sample and say I want the product in this way, then the bulk which is provided to you must match that sample. So if, for example, you order maybe maybe cement or something like that on the basis of a sample, or maybe concrete mix on the basis of a sample, the bulk of it also must correspond to that sample. You might also have situations where it is a sample and a description. What they sell you must match both. Then on fitness and quality also, if there is a holding out or that it can be used for this purpose, then if there is a violation of that, then you can make complaint as a consumer. And of course, merchantability, that it's a product which can be used for the purpose which is held out to be. The Sale of Goods Ordinance goes on to also have certain warranties which I to explain to you at a lesser level. That is warranty of possession of the property, warranty in respect of not having encumbrances, and warranty on the use of trade. That's just consequential to what I just explained. So I think now I want to now come to the most important part of this presentation. I gave you a brief introduction as to the rights one has as a consumer. All of us are consumers, as I mentioned at the beginning. Whether it's you as architects, you will advise your clients to purchase various goods and supplies for the building your designing. It might be your client who is a consumer, or you might be a consumer in your day-to-day activities. The Consumer Affairs Act number 9 of 2003 is a principal piece of legislation which we have in Sri Lanka, which provides a mechanism for consumers to agitate and address their grievances which they may have. Now that repeals several pieces of legislation we had before, and the purpose of establishing this authority now, which is 20 years ago, was to protect the life and property of consumers from harmful goods and services, to safeguard consumers from unfair trading practices, and to ensure that due consideration is given to the protection of consumer rights. Now that is important. We are today speaking about consumer protection. Before coming to the specific sections of the Consumer Affairs Act, there are several other acts if one is interested, which for the purpose of completion I must mention here. That is the Food Act of 1980 in respect of food items, the National Medicines Regulatory Authority Act in respect of medical supplies, the Sri Lanka Standards Institution, that is the institution which determines and prescribes standards, and the Intellectual Property Act of 2003, which deals with intellectual property. Now, you might ask me the question, I have explained to you as to what your rights are. You have bought some product from this exhibition. They hold out that it will do this and that. It doesn't do this and that. You are disappointed. It breaks down within about 2 months. What can you do? The simple answer to that is that in terms of the Consumer Affairs Authority Act, if you have within 3 months of purchase of a good or a service, if it does not match up to the expectations, if it doesn't match up to the holding out, if there is some defect, you can complain to the Consumer Affairs Authority of that defect. And they will basically call both parties, yourself and the manufacturer or seller. They will have an inquiry, and if they find that what you are saying is correct, they will advise the seller or the manufacturer to settle. In the event they do not settle, and if the Consumer Affairs Authority is of the opinion that yes, there is a violation of one of these implied conditions, implied warranties, there is a defect, they will then make an order against the seller or the manufacturer. And that is something which is enforceable before the Magistrates Court, and the Consumer Affairs Authority do that. I know instances where new automobiles imported from overseas have had defects, and the Consumer Affairs Authority have ordered that the vehicle be replaced. So it's a far-reaching authority, far-reaching power they have. They have a lot of scope. They have a lot of they have a lot of provisions they can rely on, and they actually enforce it. So from a vehicle down to a nut and bolt, you can complain to the Consumer Affairs Authority. It is also, they also have a helpline, 1977, which you can call, and you can bring your dispute to their attention, and they will then probably ask you to send an email to them making the complaint in respect of your grievance. So basically, that is what one finds in the Consumer Affairs Authority. There are a lot of other sections, but for the purposes of this discussion, I think that is sufficient. Finally, before concluding, I want to touch on some practical tips as consumers, practical things which come to mind. It is essential when you purchase a good or service to obtain a comprehensive receipt. Often we purchase things from places, we don't take notice of the receipt, because if there is a dispute you have to go back to the receipt. And personally I have had that problem. Once I was down south, I pumped fuel. There was something, in Mathura, by the time we got to Gaul, there was something wrong with the fuel, the car stalled. I went back and I told them, it is a fair repair, that I have pumped this fuel, it was clearly because of that. And they told me, show the receipt. And I had not taken a receipt from the fuel station, and I could not process that claim. So similarly, it is important not only to obtain a receipt, the receipt must also contain the details of what you're purchasing. What happens is there's a piece of paper with a figure, one cannot relate to a serial number, to a product, and later they will dispute as to whether that's the product they sold. As a consumer, you must read the description of the product. There is fine print. We often, even as lawyers, we sometimes don't read when we act as consumers. But it is important to read as much as we read, say, a bottle of medicine to see what the dosage is and what are the side effects. Even in a product of maybe of a certain value, one must read it and one must file it and keep it. Also the fine print, and also in respect to the warranty. A lot of, especially here, a lot of the suppliers would provide warranties in respect of their products. It sounds fancy when they tell you there's a warranty of 10 years and 15 years, but sometimes when you look at the fine print, it doesn't have all those rights and safeguards which you think that warranty has. So before purchasing, you might also ask the seller to provide a copy of the warranty to see whether actually when they say 10 years of 10 years warranty, actually whether there is meaning to that warranty. Sometimes some of the providers, though they call it a warranty, will say, well, we will for 10 years repair it if it breaks down. But if the product breaks down every 6 months, you might then consider paying a little bit more and obtain a product with a better warranty where they say if there is a breakdown, we will replace it. Because the manufacturer or the seller who gives a warranty saying, if it breaks down, we will give it, has more confidence that that product will not break down. But a seller or a manufacturer who says, we will repair it, may think, well, I can't afford to replace all this, but I will take the risk of repairing it. So ladies and gentlemen, basically that is an overview of the legal regime we have on consumer protection in Sri Lanka. I think I covered what would be needed from a helicopter view, and I hope that was of some informative value to all of you. Thank you.